Ever feel like one decision, maybe a really tough one, just completely changed your life?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Imagine that, but like on a national scale.
Wow.
That's the story we're diving into today.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Eric XIV of Sweden, a king known for his intelligence, but also paranoia.
And tragedy, right?
Yeah, ultimately it's a tragedy. We've got this podcast, Murder, Madness, and Eric XIV,
Oh, I've heard of that one.
to guide us. It really dives deep into what happened.
That sounds promising.
It jumps right into this prophecy about Eric.
A prophecy.
Yeah, that he'd be overthrown by a fair-haired man.
Talk about pressure.
Right. How do you even rule with that hanging over you?
I guess you'd be looking over your shoulder constantly.
Exactly. Prophecies in those days, they weren't just like, fun stories,
People took them seriously, especially in positions of power.
especially for a king.
Yeah, trying to maintain control.
So let's rewind a bit before we get to the paranoia.
Okay.
The podcast describes young Eric as incredibly bright,
Like a golden child, almost.
fluent in multiple languages, loved history, math, the arts.
They even had this famous French scholar as his tutor.
Yeah. It seems like he had everything going for him.
He did. And it makes the contrast with his later years even more stark.
It makes you wonder, was it always there? Or did something push him over the edge?
Yeah, the classic nature versus nurture debate. Did the weight of the crown do it?
Or that prophecy? Maybe both.
Could be.
But there's another piece to this puzzle.
What's that?
Eric's relentless search for a wife.
He wasn't just looking for love, was he?
Not exactly. It was more strategic. He wanted a queen who could boost his power.
A power couple.
Exactly. And he aimed high. Remember his attempts to woo Queen Elizabeth I
Queen Elizabeth.
of England, the one and only. He sent her tons of proposals.
Wow, he must have been smitten.
I think it was more about the politics. The podcast even mentions this portrait he sent her.
A portrait.
Full length, dressed in this bright orange outfit.
Oh, wow. Trying to make an impression.
But Elizabeth, she was known for her wit, and she wasn't having it.
I bet she had a sharp response.
She did. Essentially, thanks, but no thanks. I prefer being single.
Oh, snap. She saw right through him.
Totally. But rejections aside, Eric did become king. And he went straight to consolidating his power.
Makes sense. He wanted to secure his position.
He saw his half-brothers and the nobility as threats.
Yeah, I could see how that would breed paranoia.
And this is where Gurn Person comes in.
Rare person.
Yeah, a commoner Eric chose as his trusted advisor.
That's interesting. Why would he choose someone outside the usual circles?
It raised a lot of eyebrows at the time. Some historians think Person was a master manipulator.
Taking advantage of Eric's insecurities.
Others believe Eric saw him as a genuine ally, someone he could truly trust.
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those historical mysteries. But regardless, Person becomes a key player in all this.
And with him in the picture, Eric's paranoia really takes hold.
Especially towards the powerful Sturge family.
They were a major force in Swedish politics at the time.
Eric was convinced they were plotting against him.
And there was that incident with John, his half-brother.
Marrying a Polish princess without Eric's permission.
That definitely would felt like a challenge to his authority.
And he saw the series behind it.
Fueling the paranoia even more.
Exactly. But it's Nils Sture, the eldest first son, who becomes central to the story.
Why is that?
Because he was the living embodiment of that prophecy.
Oh, the fair-haired man.
Yep. And Eric went after him. Accused him of treason, had him arrested.
Did he execute him?
No, but it was worse in a way. He humiliated him publicly.
Public humiliation.
Made him wear a straw crown, paraded him through the streets, let people throw things at him.
That's brutal.
It was a show of power, but it backfired spectacularly.
I can imagine humiliating a powerful family like that.
Instead of isolating Nils, it just made the nobility even angrier.
And more resentful of Eric?
It was a huge miscalculation. And this leads us to a pivotal moment. The dog in Uppsala.
The dog. What does that even mean?
It was code for a secret meeting of the Riksdag, the Swedish parliament.
A secret meeting.
Yeah, Eric used it as a trap.
A trap.
Invited all these nobles, including the Stures, under false pretenses.
Pretending to discuss important matters.
Exactly. Then he had them arrested, imprisoned them at Uppsala Castle.
Wow, that's a serious escalation.
It was. And his behavior leading up to the murders was, well, erratic, to say the least.
Like he was losing his grip.
Pacing outside the cells, sometimes apologizing, sometimes ranting.
Sounds like a complete mental breakdown.
The pressure, the prophecy, the fear, it all came crashing down in this horrific act.
It's hard to even imagine.
And it gets even darker from here because Eric didn't stop at imprisonment. He took matters into his own hands.
What do you mean? Yeah, he went into Nils Stur's cell and murdered him
Oh my gosh.
with a dagger.
It's hard to even fathom that.
It is, and right after he killed Nils' father too, Svante Stur.
Jeez, the podcast talks about how Eric was both, like, remorseful,
Yeah.
but also completely detached.
Right, like he knew it was wrong, but couldn't quite grasp the reality of what he'd done.
Yeah, totally. The sources make it seem like he was really having a break from reality.
They do. Some say he was crying, begging for forgiveness. Others describe him as,
Catatonic.
yeah, just staring blankly, like in shock.
It's tragic, this king who was once so promising,
Right.
so obsessed with control, just completely loses it.
It's a powerful reminder of how fragile our minds can be.
Absolutely. So what happened next? Did the court finally see him as the danger he was?
Oh, absolutely. The murders at Uppsala Castle were a turning point.
It wasn't just the violence, was it?
No, it was the complete disregard for the law.
The rules, the norms,
Everyone saw him as a
a
liability.
threat to the whole country.
So it sets the stage for a power struggle.
It does. His brothers are waiting in the wings, ready to take over.
What does Eric do? Does he even try to fight back?
He does. There are a few, skirmishes, I guess you could call them.
Between his forces and John's. Exactly. John quickly becomes the leader of the rebellion.
But I imagine those murders had really done a number on Eric's support.
Oh, totally. He'd lost the trust of everyone.
The advisors,
The people.
even some of his own troops.
He was alone.
The podcast mentions that he tries to blame Gurren person.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Calls him a venomous influence.
Classic scapegoat.
It was too little. Too late, though.
Did anyone believe him?
I doubt it. Everyone saw Person as Eric's right-hand man.
The architect of it all?
Whether he actually forced Eric to do it, though,
It's impossible to know.
we'll never know for sure.
So what happens to person?
He doesn't escape. When John's forces take Stockholm, both Eric and Person are imprisoned.
What a downfall.
Person's tortured and executed.
Oh, wow.
Eric is spared.
It makes you wonder why John would spare him after all that.
Maybe family obligation?
Or maybe he just didn't want more bloodshed.
Could be.
So what about Karen?
Karen Mann's daughter.
Yeah, where does she fit into all this?
She's a fascinating character, you
Mhm.
know,
Before all the chaos, Eric had married her, made her queen.
defying all those societal norms.
It is a huge scandal.
Proof of his madness, according to the nobles.
But was it love?
It's hard to say. Some historians believe it was genuine.
Eric, so isolated, finding solace in her,
Others think it was a power move.
trying to connect with the common people.
It's a mystery.
From commoner to queen, it must have been wild for her.
The podcast mentions a period of calm after the marriage.
A
Eric even made a statement thanking God for delivering him from the devil.
So he thought he was cured?
The statement itself is a bit rambling, though, not exactly convincing.
I guess we'll never know what Corinne truly thought.
The podcast says she called herself Eric's chosen queen a lot.
The letters.
Yeah, maybe downplaying her role, trying not to make herself a target.
Smart move.
She had to survive somehow.
That it couldn't last forever with Eric deposed, imprisoned.
Corinne's in prison, too.
What happened to her?
It's a bit of a mystery,
A
actually.
mystery.
There are theories she might have played a role in Eric's death.
Wait, what?
Eric died in prison under mysterious circumstances.
I thought the official cause was never determined.
It wasn't, but rumors spread that he was poisoned
Poisoned.
with arsenic.
In his food.
In his pea soup, actually.
Wow, and people think Corinne might have been involved.
Maybe out of loyalty, wanting to end his suffering.
That's a heavy accusation.
There's no hard proof, but it's a possibility.
So Corinne's fate, it's uncertain.
Well, after Eric's death, John released her from prison,
He did.
gave her an estate in Finland. She lived out her days there.
That's surprising. I would have thought he'd want to keep her away.
You'd think so. Maybe he felt sympathy for her.
Or maybe he just didn't see her as a threat anymore.
Could be either way. She escaped the tragedy that consumes so many others.
From controversial queen to exiled noblewoman, what a life.
It's a story in itself.
But what about Eric's kids? What happened to them?
Their fates were quite different. Their daughter Sigrid ended up as a lady-in-waiting.
For John's daughter.
Yeah, ironic considering her father tried to kill him.
That must have been awkward.
And their son, Gustav, his story is the most tragic.
What happened to him?
He was taken from Corinne, raised by Jesuits in Poland.
Oh, wow.
He lived in poverty as a mercenary, even forgot how to speak Swedish.
That's heartbreaking.
There's even an account of him meeting Corinne years later. She didn't recognize him.
It seems like Eric's troubles followed his children,
It's a reminder of how actions have consequences.
and how those consequences can ripple through generations.
Exactly.
Back for our final look at Eric the 40th.
Quite a story, huh?
Full of twists and turns.
Brilliance, ambition, love, madness.
Tragedy, too.
It's all there.
So as we wrap up, I keep wondering, how should history remember Eric the 40th?
Villain. Victim.
It's tempting to label people, right?
Especially historical figures.
But Eric's story, it's complicated.
More than a simple label.
He did some good things early on, right?
He did. Seemed genuinely interested in helping his people.
Reforming laws, promoting education.
Encouraging trade.
There was a time when people saw him as a good ruler.
A progressive one, even.
It's like there were two Erics. The visionary leader, then the tormented soul.
It makes you wonder, do his later actions erase the good?
The murders, the instability.
Uppsala Castle definitely casts a long shadow.
But can we just ignore his early accomplishments?
I don't think so. It's about seeing the whole picture.
Acknowledging both the good and the bad.
The full spectrum of his reign.
What about his mental state? The podcast uses the word madness,
We have to be careful with labels.
especially applying modern ones to the past.
We weren't there. We don't have his medical records.
So we can't diagnose him
But we can say his behavior was, well, concerning.
by today's standards, for sure.
Whether it was true mental illness, pressure, who knows?
It's one of those historical mysteries.
History's messy like that.
What about the impact on Sweden, though? Did his actions have lasting effects?
Definitely. His reign was a turbulent time for Sweden.
Conflicts, instability, violence.
It all left its mark.
His downfall also led to a power struggle between his brothers.
Even though his reign was short, it had a big impact.
It makes you wonder what could have been
If he'd been able to control his darker side.
if he'd used his intelligence
But
differently.
it's a what if we can't answer.
History's full of those, isn't it?
Missed opportunities, tragic turns.
And in Eric's case, those turns affected so many others.
His wife, his children, everyone caught in the middle.
It reminds us that leaders' actions have far-reaching consequences.
For better or worse.
Well said. That wraps up our deep dive into Eric the 14th. A complex figure.
A fascinating story.
Hope you learned something new.
If you want to know more, check out Murder, Madness, and Eric the 14th.
Great suggestion. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions.
And keep diving deep.